Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Tax, the show for growth-minded CPAs and real estate professionals in tax. I'm your host, Tim LeMasters. In today's episode, we will discuss how to identify credit and incentive opportunities for your clients and how to start having those conversations. Joining us for the first time on Let's Talk Tax is Reid Pittard. Reid is a relationship manager in McGuire Sponsel's location advisory services practice. Reid, welcome to the show.
Tim, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah,
I'm excited to be here.
It's good to have you on here. Excited for you to be here.
Yeah, this is a nice setup. It's fun.
Yeah, it is. I think a good place to start is just tell us a little about yourself, Reid.
Yeah, so I've been at McGuire Sponsel for about 3.5 years now. I didn't come in with an economic development background where a lot of my teammates do, but luckily here, I have such a good opportunity to grow and learn from a lot of those folks that I've been on kind of every side of the project.
Yeah, you started on the analyst side, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of the compliance back end.
So what'd you learn there? And I know obviously Ben Moore on that practice has done really well, and he came from the local economic development group, so he's got some background to it, understands the programs. But on the analyst side, what'd you learn on that side of it?
Yeah, well, just starting on the compliance end of it. So when you see these headlines of so-and-so gets $1 million incentive offer from this city, that's a great tag to put on a headline, but really they're not realizing that benefit until a year or so afterwards, and for about 10 to 20 years down the road, they realize it as time goes on. So we're filing these compliance reports to make sure that the company's doing their end, growing as they said, and that the economic development groups are fulfilling the promise too. So I started out doing a lot of those reports, and you really learn what's needed for the benefit to actually get realized, and just how every program works. And I worked in several different states, a ton of different counties. So where the process is similar, there's nuances to all of it. So
Sure. Yeah, some states are better than others, right? It's just kind of how it works. But so let's kind of dive in real fast, and let's talk about the Amazons of the world.
Sure.
All right? Because when you think of credits and incentives, if Amazon's going to go to they're looking at 3 different states, 3 different locations, what's a typical project look like for the economic development side? What are they looking to accomplish to get Amazon to come to them? Walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that goes almost beyond credits and incentives a little bit.
Sure.
The states they'll roll out the red carpet for those large projects, as they should. They're going to show them, all their best properties that fit their needs. They're going to maybe do a big labor analysis, say, hey, we've got the labor here to do what you want to do. Mm-hmm. And then they will also include their incentive package. And a lot of states have these discretionary funds or deal closing funds that they will use to land some of those larger projects. Mm-hmm. Some of the smaller projects can tap into those, but typically they set it aside for these multi-billion-dollar projects.
Yeah, but some of these smaller companies can take advantage of this, right?
100%.
And I think one of the challenges that we notice in this area is one, it's very proactive. Once a shovel hits the ground, once a lease is signed, once employees are hired, there's really no leverage there.
Right.
But the thing that I notice with some of the smaller companies is they think, let's just go out, we'll check the box, get some statutory benefits. And I think they really don't understand that the discretionary side and the benefit on that side of it is much larger than the statutory side, right? And that's where we lose a lot of dollars.
Right.
And I know that our CPAs, some of our relationships, we've struggled with that in the past. This is not a shield, right? We can go there. It's a sword. It's a consulting arm for them to really go out and help have conversations that they normally wouldn't have with their clients, and just ask, what's your growth look like over the next 5 years, right?
Right.
So looking at some of those companies, some of the smaller companies, and I say smaller companies, let's just talk industry. Let's call manufacturing, for example. Mm-hmm. Okay, manufacturers doing the same thing we just talked about with Amazons of the world. What are those triggers, those key areas and things that they're going to plan to do that'll help support growth from the economic development group?
Yeah, when we think about growth, we're largely looking at growth by new headcount and then new investment. So if you've got a client in select industries, and we can talk a little bit about industries too, but in your example, manufacturing, if they're adding heads or making new investment, maybe in new equipment and a new building, maybe they're building a new building, that's when it starts to it get to the point where we need to be brought into the conversation, because like as you're hinting at, the triggers can be a lot smaller than what I think most people think.
Sure.
You know, if you're adding 15 to 20 new people in the next 3 to 5 years, I think it still makes sense to talk to us about it.
I know states are all different. Let's just say Indiana, for example. What's the typical value there?
Average $10,000 per job.
Okay, and if I jump over to Missouri?
About the same in Missouri.
Same.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, really, that's a pretty good baseline for most states.
Okay.
Indiana will get pretty aggressive if they're good wages, and as other states, they're usually tied to wages too.
So wage is important.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you focus on wage, what's a typical wage look like? What are they wanting to see on that side of it?
Typically, it is above the county average of
Okay.
where the project is going to be.
And that's across the country.
That's
most
that's
part.
a good baseline. Again, it always depends, but
Yeah.
that's a pretty good baseline to start at.
Okay. So looking at these projects, let's talk about a timeline with this. All right. So company says, hey, we're going to look to, and we'll go keep on manufacturing. We're going to look to add 50 jobs over the next 5 years. We're going to build, a 50,000 square foot facility, probably put another $5 million worth of equipment in there. Help me just walk us through kind of what that project timeline looks like. How do we have to get involved with the economic development group? What's your team doing on that side?
Sure. Yeah, we need to be brought in 30 to 60 days minimum before shovels are going in ground, before permits are being pulled, ideally.
I would say that's a little late probably too,
yeah.
right? Okay.
So 30 to 60 days before those points, we typically will have enough time to procure an incentive package. It's always better to be earlier than that, so we're not, busting our butts to try to get something done.
Because most of these meetings are what, once a month?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's that the 30, 60 day timeline really goes to the local end, because we're getting in front of city council meetings and stating our case as to why this project should get incentives and why they should be excited about it. If we're working with just the state, depending on where you're going, we can be a little bit more nimble usually. But
Okay.
those city council meetings, a lot of times, are only once a month, and it usually takes 2 meetings to get it done.
So 2 meetings. Once we get done with those 2 meetings, what's the next step? Is that where they usually have some package put in place for you?
Yeah, so it'll usually be a preliminary offer, which is sometimes binding on the city's end, sometimes not. But after that preliminary offer, you're usually good to go to proceed with the project, and they'll tie up final agreements afterwards.
Okay. And not to derail us here, but let's say a company sends out an email, shoots an email blast out, talking about what they plan on doing while you're in the mix of those meetings, and local economic development group gets wind of that. What's that look like?
That could cause a community to pull their offer, even if they've submitted a preliminary offer. You want to hold off on releasing any kind of marketing blast or any what's the word I'm looking for here, Tim? Announcement of the project until those agreements are finalized.
Okay. All right. So now going back to the project timeline, I just want to throw that out there because I know that can be a bit of a headache. But so looking at the timeline, we get an incentives deal. Okay. A manufacturing client signs off on it. They move forward. Some of these deals are typically 3 years, 5 years. Some can be 10 years, depending on the size of them, right? We're looking at a 3-year deal. All right. And when they start to hire and they start to do all the things that they need to do, does the money just comes to them? How's that work?
It depends on the nature of the program. And whenever I'm in these conversations with our clients, I feel like people get annoyed with me for continually saying it depends. But if it's a grant, sometimes you get the money right away, right when you get the agreement. They'll give you the money, and then you have the compliance on the back end to make sure you're fulfilling your promise to them.
But is there clawbacks on the grants?
Usually.
Okay.
But most cases, it's their performance based. So you're realizing it maybe annually over the course of 5 to 10 years, I'd say.
Okay.
I don't know, does that answer your question?
Well, I kind of want to talk about the compliance a little bit, because if we have a company that goes out and they just do this on their own, they don't do any reporting. How often have you seen where companies don't receive the benefit because of the reporting portion of it?
A lot. I just got one just last week of a company who got a nice incentive package, and they called us wondering why they haven't gotten any money yet. And it comes to find out, they haven't been doing any compliance reporting. So we're helping them out now. They're gonna get a nice benefit this year for the first time, just because.
So this wasn't a client of ours originally.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, correct.
So someone came
They already
after
had
the fact,
right.
already had it in place. Was this something they did on their own? Did they use lawyers? What, like, kind of how's?
I think they had a group to procure it
Okay.
with him, and it sounded like there was a miscommunication on, what was going to go on after it was procured. I don't know exactly. I just know that there was no compliance reporting going on, and we were able to get that done for them. They should get, like I said, a really nice benefit here this year.
Nice. Is there some sort of sunset on that? And let's say somebody doesn't ever do the reporting and they're 7 years down the road, and they go back and say, oh my gosh, we had all this money, we didn't get it.
Yeah, there can be. I mean,
Okay.
if you're non-compliant, they can pull the incentive package totally.
Okay.
And in this case, the state we were working at, they could have done that. Luckily, they worked with us and said, okay, now they've got someone helping them out. We'll leave this intact for you guys. So.
Okay. Let's talk about industry specific. All right. If I look at just retail, and I'm the dollars are coming from the local area already. I come in, I'm a restaurant, for example, or just some sort of strip mall that I'm looking to put in place that's going to have retail centers there. What does that look like? Is there opportunity for that, or are we, from an industry standpoint, are we looking more manufacturing, software, technology area, healthcare maybe?
Mm-hmm.
Walk us through all those.
Yeah, so retail is on its own is typically not going to get incentivized. There's always special cases. Some cities have special programs, but those are pretty few and far between. And if there's retail in the project, it needs to be tied to a larger project. Maybe it's a huge multifamily development with retail on the bottom floor. Those can be good to go to get a pretty good incentive package. But the way I always like to look at it is if it's a company that is following the population. So in this case, a retail restaurant or maybe a car dealership, they don't want to locate in the middle of nowhere. They're not going to get any business. They're going to follow where the population already is.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not going to get incentivized. But if it's a company that the population may follow it, like a manufacturing operation, it's going to bring jobs to the community. Maybe more people move in. Those are the types of companies that will get incentivized. And I always include headquarter operations to that as well, because it can be a retail company, but if it's the headquarter operation of that retail company, then they could be incentivized too.
Okay, so like a White Castle headquarters, or
exactly
your favorite Culver's.
There you go.
Okay. Industries obviously are very important just because we get a lot of these questions. And so I'm going to kind of stick to that just a little bit. If I'm looking at a manufacturing company that has just got, certain wage jobs, and if we're meeting the industry standard, are they going to get the same amount as a technology company, or is there something different between those two companies based on the industry itself?
You mean like the same amount of benefit?
Same amount of benefit, yeah.
It always depends. And if we're looking at job creation tax credit, that's probably going to be more tied to the wage. If whichever company has higher wages is probably going to get a higher benefit.
Okay.
But with manufacturing, there's other things tied to it, like the purchase of new manufacturing equipment. They often are owner-operators, so they own their building.
Yep.
Whereas a tech company is probably going to be leasing their space. And
Sure.
there may not be anything on that end, but
maybe some remote working and things of that nature.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay, makes sense. What about like consulting arms? Can consultants take advantage of this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I would assume it's going to be it's going to depend on where revenue's coming from. If it's just coming from the local area, probably not. But if it's something they're getting a certain amount of dollars or a certain percentage of money that's coming in from outside the local area or maybe outside the state,
that's a great
probably
point.
going to drive some more money.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's a great point. Kentucky in particular has a specification on those where you have to have a certain amount of revenue coming from outside of Kentucky to get incentivized.
Okay.
And there are other states that have that too. And that's a great point.
Now, I know also like acquisitions, there can be opportunity there. And it doesn't necessarily, the jobs don't change, right?
Mm-hmm.
The parking space doesn't change. People are still parking in the same spot, but certain places, an acquisition would be looked at, all those jobs would be looked at new jobs.
So that gets a little tricky.
All right.
And
Talk to me then.
most states are not going to qualify all those jobs that are being acquired as new.
Okay.
But some do. And I guess I would say with acquisitions, we typically view that as maybe that's kind of the spark plug for new growth. So if you're acquiring another business, maybe we can't do anything that's of the jobs and equipment that's already there. But usually that means you're buying it because you think you can grow it. So we'd look at anything beyond that. I wouldn't ever rule out the acquisition if that's going on. If you have clients that are doing that, we need to talk about it because that's another one where it depends on what's going on.
Sure. Well, since I know you brought some information with you.
Sure.
Give us a couple of case studies. Give us just
Yeah.
some examples of how this works and what it looks like as far as from just a overall dollar amount.
Yeah, that's this gets so abstract. It's nice to put some numbers to it. So I got a few examples. We had a client here in Indiana. We'll start there. And the scope of the project was 81 new employees and about $11 million in new investment.
Okay.
So pretty solid project,
Sure.
mid-sized company. And that growth is over the course of 3 to 5 years. And we were able to procure $2.25 million in incentives for them.
Okay.
And keep in mind, that's realized over the course of about 10 years.
Okay.
And we're actually working on one more incentive for them. So there could be more to that.
And what'd you say the industry was?
So this is a tech company. They're a podcast management company.
Looky there.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Look
That's
at
great.
us.
That's great. We're starting something here. All right. On next one. What do you got?
Yeah, then I've got one in Tennessee, similar scope. I should have mixed up the scope, but keep in mind we do work with all size companies, small to really large. But 52 new employees and $15 million in new investment. We were able to get them a $370,000 utility credit. So they're adding new power.
Mm-hmm.
They got basically a discount on their electric bill. And then $1.38 million in a job creation tax credit.
That's great.
And that's a manufacturing company.
So is there a company that you would say they're too small for something like this? I had this question was asked to me the other day, and I kind of thought in my head, I'm like, not really, right?
Yeah, never too small.
It's really a good
not
starting
to have
point,
a conversation, right?
Yeah, I mean,
And a lot of times, sorry to cut you off. A lot of
go ahead.
times, a company may say, "Oh, well, we're only going to hire maybe 3 people this year," but they're just not looking far enough out. You can look 5 years out. Are you going to hire 15 people in 5
Yeah.
years? Maybe. Okay, well then maybe we want to get something procured for you.
does it ever make you nervous? Because entrepreneurs are obviously going to be, they're very optimistic, right?
Yeah.
Does it ever make you nervous when you ask them that? Because we look at some states, there is clawbacks on this.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you get them to be realistic with that?
That's a great question, and we're very conscious of potential clawbacks. So we kind of know when to be aggressive in our projections, where you're not really going to get hurt for not performing, and where to be more cautious. So that's a great question. It depends on the client. So you may need them to rein it in a little bit and just say, hey, okay, worst case scenario, what do you think? How much do you think you're going to grow by?
Yeah.
Or if they're more often than not, they're too cautious, and so we're stretching to get them an optimistic projection.
Okay. And then what about in these same conversations? Has anybody ever been like, hey, what about site selections?
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you help someone with, obviously I'm sure they have locations that they have in mind,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or maybe there's one primary location that's very important to them, but there's a couple areas around there that could be also beneficial. How do you work through with multiple economic development groups to see what makes the most sense?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, those site selection projects, that can give us the best leverage to get the best deals a lot of times. And there's a couple other things attached to it. So we can procure incentive packages from multiple different communities so that you can compare them and pair that with typically working with a broker, make sure you have the site that you want and all the power is there. Do you need rail? I mean, there's so much else that goes into it that we'll partner with folks to help out with, but we can do labor analyses to see, where's the labor pool at? Are there enough people here to man your equipment line, basically,
Okay.
or whatever it is?
Sure.
There's a couple other things to it, and I guess we could get into it if you need, but we're happy to look at multiple communities at once.
Okay. And do those communities compete against each other?
Oh, yeah.
Or what about single state that has 3 different communities? Those communities compete with each other as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well,
I would
most of the
assume
time.
there's certain states that probably put a hold on that, right?
They do. Yeah,
Okay.
most of the time they do. I know in Ohio, in central Ohio, they have a kind of an agreement, like we're not going to steal each other's companies. Yeah, they'll compete. I mean, those counties, those cities, they want good companies, so they're going to try to land them.
Okay. Kind of changing directions here. I know that we talk a lot about, these incentives and the opportunities. Who's a good, we've always worked with CPA firms.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the driving force of our business. Who's a good partner outside of that in this space that we work with?
Commercial real estate brokers.
Okay.
Yeah, they're in front of these projects, and so where with CPAs and with brokers too, sometimes we'll run into the timing problem where something's already happened, and it may be too late for incentives. It doesn't happen as often with brokers, and you can kind of get a bit more industry specific with them. There's industrial brokers, office brokers, and then retail. So we partner really well with industrial commercial real estate brokers.
Okay. And what about, I know there's sometimes bankers getting kind of the front of these things.
Commercial bankers, attorneys, whoever's in front of a company who is growing, we can partner with.
Yeah. And most of these people are kind of engaged with that. So I would say it's again, going back to the CPAs, and I tell you what, we have a lot of CPA firms that have really kind of started to take off with this and understand it. It's just sometimes a challenge because a lot of times people call and say, hey, I just broke ground on this property, or I just broke the wall down and we're going to expand in our lease. We just hired 35 people. We're looking to grow some more. Those a lot that we hear. So on the broker side, sometimes they're getting the call and they're kind of first act is what I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's true. And they're helping them identify a site. So that can pair with the site selection. I think one thing I will say, if there's any brokers who are listening to this, that I think is sometimes a pain point for them is, they don't want anyone to get in the way of the deal. And we're not going to do that. We're going to work on their timeline. We'll work as fast as we can, and we'll procure what we can in your timeline. When
it comes to credits and incentives, I always like throwing this at the guest that's on here, and I love to put people on the spot, so I want to put you on the spot.
Yes.
What is one thing that you think we should not leave on the table today? Something we should discuss?
If you're thinking about growing and you don't know, you don't match the description of our perfect client, like our manufacturing client, just call us. We've gotten creative so many different times with different incentives that are out there, offered by groups that maybe aren't typical. Just give us a call. We're happy to tell you if you do or do not qualify. We're happy to take you as far as you want to go with us.
How do these conversations, once we get involved, how do they typically start? What's it typically sound like?
Sure. So we're trying to get a feel for the project. We need to know the scope, a lot of things that we talked about. Where are you looking to locate? How many new jobs? What's the new investment? Is there anything else about the project that we should know about? We want to also get a narrative behind it.
Okay.
Where it's not just numbers, right? Like we want the communities to know that this is a company that they're going to want to work with.
Do they have to go to these meetings with you?
No, they don't have to.
So you guys take it and run with it.
Yeah. It helps if they're there a lot of times, and sometimes they want to come along. But they don't have to. We can cover it. But beyond that, once we get engaged, we're immediately talking to the communities, to the state, and talking through the project to procure these incentives.
Perfect.
And once we get an offer, we're negotiating. We're with them all the way through, all the way to the back end compliance. As we started this conversation, that's what I started doing here at McGuire Sponsel.
Yeah. A couple just firing questions here.
Fire away.
If you're talking to a CPA or you're talking to a broker or a banker, what are some things that they should be listening for that say, okay, I need to call Reid?
Sure. Always goes back to new jobs and new investment. So if you're hearing, we're really trying to hire a new VP operations. Oh, really? Are you hiring any other positions right now? Yeah, we're probably going to add, 5 new jobs this year. Oh, well, what about the next 3 to 5 years? What does that look like? Just try to get them to expand on if they're hiring anybody. Are they in growth mode, or are they just trying to replace folks who maybe left?
Okay.
And of course, if they're looking for new space, that typically means they're growing, or maybe they're consolidating. If you're consolidating, there could be a chance for incentives as well. You don't just have to be growing. Especially if you're consolidating from going from like 2 or 3 states down to 1.
Okay.
New space, new jobs.
That's it.
Easy.
Piece of cake. Thanks for tuning in today. Remember to subscribe to @Let's Talk Tax podcast channel on YouTube to be notified and receive all new episodes. In addition, we invite you to visit us online at McGuireSponsel.com/Let's Talk Tax podcast to see today's show notes, technical resources, and link to more about today's content.